Fellow board members, today we celebrate the American Indian Alaska Native Heritage Month as we honor the culture, history, and traditions of the people who were the first inhabitants of what we now call the United States. Land that now nurtures people from all across the entire world. As we begin this observance, let us center our minds and our hearts in two things. Every single one of you in this room knows the truth of this. Trauma can leave an indelible mark on a heart and on a mind. NEA members see evidence of that reality every day in their schools and in their work sites and communities. The second thing we know is true is that as leaders and activists representing the nation's largest labor union, we must stand in solidarity and solidly on a foundation that is built by truth, especially in this critical moment in our nation's history. We know that the absence of the full truth makes full healing and true learning impossible. And the truth is this: along with many triumphs, our nation's history includes the undeniable tragedy of Native American boarding schools. They were part of the deliberate effort to erase Native culture, to rob indigenous communities of that culture and their language and their identity. I am so proud of the work you did during our last Super Week to take that step. It's just a step. Take that step toward repairing those deep, lasting wounds by this board, the largest lobbying group in the country. You lobbied and advocated for the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policies Act. And I know each of us will remain committed to lifting Native American voices and making sure that indigenous history and perspectives are front and center in our curriculum across this nation. I know we, the NEA, will continue to highlight the importance of culturally relevant pedagogy that honors Native American history, culture, and languages. Today, we will hear from the Chief Executive Officer of the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. Our American Indian Alaska Native Caucus Chair, Tracy Hartman Bradley, will tell you more about our very special guest and our honored ally, Deb Parker. Tracy?
Chamay Mayalachwaks, which means hello, my relatives. I'm Tracy Hartman Bradley. I'm Supiak. I'm from the region of Kodiak, Old Harbor Native Corporation in Alaska on Kodiak Island. Indian boarding schools is an issue that is near and dear to my heart, as I am the daughter of a boarding school child. I'm feeling my grandma right now. And I think back to a time where my grandmother, who was only 4'10", had to go and protect one of her children. And she actually took a frying pan to the missionary school and beat a missionary for beating her child because we did not hit our children. The stories of boarding schools are invisible histories that we need to share. You won't find many, if any, in the books and in the stories of our history. The atrocities, rapes, and murders of our children go unanswered. But with hope and recognition, these invisible histories will finally come to light, and we will be able to tell the truth about these stories. It is really my great honor to introduce Deborah Parker, as she is, Deborah Parker is a well-respected mother, leader, and citizen of the Tulalip tribe. She is also Yaqui, and Apache descent on her mother's side. She joined NABS as the Director of Policy and Advocacy in May of 2021. Prior to her roles as a director, she helped coordinate and host the 2019 Second Annual Conference honoring Native survivors in Tulalip, Washington. Motivated by her tribal elders during the pandemic, Deborah, along with several other volunteers, organized the We Love You elder care packages for U.S. boarding school survivors, with the goal of delivering 1,000 packages on behalf of NABS. Her life goal has been to honor and uplift her indigenous ways of life. She comes with over 25 years of national and international legislative policy and advocacy experience. Deborah's previous roles include the TWN Executive Director of the Residential Schools Healing of British Columbia, Canada, Government Affairs Policy Analyst for the Tulalip Tribes, Senior Policy Advisor for the Pipestream Law, and Director of Equity and Diversity and Indigenous Education in Marysville School District. Deborah was also instrumental in passing state and federal legislation, including the Violence Against Women's Act, passed in 2013. She was a board member of the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center for 8 years and frequent keynote speaker on the restoration of tribal law and sovereignty, education, safety for indigenous nations, and environmental protections. Her work has been recognized and acknowledged across the globe, notably in Canada, Mexico, and the United States. Please give an NEA welcome to Deborah.
ACM Tigwitsid Haslahel Sitsayalsa Sitsta Twalcha Duflela ACM Tigwitsid NEA. Thank you for that beautiful standing up, my goodness. What a beautiful warm welcome. Wow, I walked in the lobby and I've been here for a week in Washington, D.C., helping to lobby on behalf of Senate Bill 1723 and HR 7227 to create a U.S. Commission on Indian boarding schools. I have the honor, and I spoke in my language thinking you all know what that means, which would be so beautiful if that was a reality. My traditional name is Sitsayaltsa, and that's my grandmother's name 4 generations back. So I carry her traditional name. She was a medicine woman. She lived in the longhouse along the shores of what is now called, it's our Salish Seas in Washington State. And so, Washington State folks, hello, okay. And so it's an honor to be here as, I traveled from Washington State to Washington, D.C., and you lose 3 hours, so I'm a little, still exhausted. You got it? Yeah, you guys, but you look better than me. I woke up like it's been a long week of advocating and speaking to leaders in this nation about the Federal Indian Boarding School. And as the CEO for the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, we are leading the movement for truth, justice, and healing for Indigenous peoples impacted by U.S. Indian boarding schools. So we have a big job. 4 years ago, I met with then Representative Deb Haaland, who is now U.S. Secretary Deb Haaland. And I, excuse me, I walked into her office and asked her to help sponsor a bill to provide a space, thank you, to provide a space for Indigenous peoples, for the boarding school survivors. In our culture and in our traditions, as a Tulalip woman, we know to honor the spirits of our children. We know to honor in our cultural way means to recognize, means to see without seeing. It means to uplift the voices of those you're not quite sure or understand what happened because you did not read about it in the school system. You were not really allowed to talk about it in your homelands. In fact, I became vice chairwoman of my tribe, and not many of our council members wanted to discuss the boarding school. And as a young girl, I kept asking, like, what happened? Maybe I didn't say it aloud, but I kept wondering what happened to our people. Because I'm a young girl, I'm excited for life. And I'm looking around wondering, why do we have to live in so much pain and sorrow? Why are some of my aunties and uncles and relatives so hurt? What's happening? Then I began to ask, well, who am I? Can I fit in the school district? Can I be my full self? And I found that out in kindergarten, that I couldn't be my full self. So I went home and I told my dad, Dad, can I be Mexican? Because people understood, even in my own community, they understood Mexican, white, others, other than Native Americans. Because it was such a feeling of being invisible. And so I tried hard to be everything else. Until one day when I did tell my dad, can I be something else? And he said, why? You are part of me. And that was the first time I seen my dad cry. And as I'm learning in my older years of why our family often didn't cry, I began to learn about the boarding schools. And I began to hear about the elders who were taught not to cry. Because if they cried, they were served, they were hit, they were punished, they were locked in basements. They were put in a little jail cell that was on the beach in Tulalip. They were marched for hours until they couldn't walk in military clothing. And so they tried to stop crying so that they wouldn't be punished. And that's something that, the boarding school had closed when I was, before I was born. And it closed before my dad was born. But the residual impacts really, really affected each and every one of us. And so, as a young girl, I asked that question, like, what does it mean to be an Indigenous woman? And I guess after a while watching family members, you begin to realize that you have to create that space yourself. And you can take each teaching and each tool that they're able to give you and do your very best. Because I was born in 1970, when it was still illegal to practice our culture. So what did that mean to me before the Indian Religious Freedom Act, 1978? What did that mean to me? That meant if I was in my dad's truck and we had some drums or blankets in the back of our truck, that we could be pulled over and arrested. And so what we did was to drive to certain places for our ceremonies, and then they left us at a house so they can go sing their songs. And that meant that I didn't get to hear those songs. So as a young adult, maybe in my teenage years, I had to reintroduce myself to my culture. And I had to reimagine what that looked like and what that meant. Because in school, it was not a safe place. And I watched most of my friends in the Marysville School District be kicked out of school. And at that time, there was, I think, a 65%, they say, dropout rate, kick-out rate. And so most of my family members and friends who are Native no longer attended school with me. And so that was my reality. And I did my best to go to school. And I remember what Tiatmas, Ray Moses, an elder, told me. He said, because I said, this is tough, going to school where there's nothing about us. We don't even exist in this school. And he said, Deb, when you go to school, remember when the teachers say, pigs fly? You say, yes, teacher, pigs fly. And you go and get your education so you can come back to our community and help us grow. Just get through that system. And so I did what he said. I went to university, received my education, and I said, yes, teacher, yes. I marked all the right boxes and did the best that I could. But now, excuse me, now I'm proud to say that I've returned to my culture, and I now sing my songs. And I now teach my children to sing the songs, and they were raised singing their song. And I have to admit that there was times that I had fear for them when they sang their songs. And I know that our elders remained quiet, proudly quiet, but I know that they had fear too, because that was the residual effect of the boarding school. That was the residual effect of colonization, teaching us that we don't matter, that we don't have a place. And I know when a lot of our Native family members speak out in public, there's often a fear. But I no longer have that fear. I woke up this morning and I thought, I'm coming to speak to the National Education Association. And I don't have a written speech, and there's no right way to speak, because in our longhouses, our elders teach us to speak from our heart, to speak, there's stomach, our spirit, to speak from our spirit. And that's wrong. That's not wrong. It's not wrong. So when we speak to each other in that truth and in that light, it's a powerful place to be. And it feels so good, because I don't have to be anyone else but me. And so I know part of this work of understanding the boarding school era is to understand who we are. But if educators and attorneys and judges and police officers and folks here in Congress don't understand who we are, how can they represent us? If you don't see us, how can we be represented? If we're not in the room, how can we be seen? And so even in this day and time, it is so important to create space, and not just one or two Native American, Alaska Native, Pueblo relatives, but to create space for more. It is so critically important in this day and time. If we are going to heal, we need to bring those folks who understand this land, who understand the spiritual connection of this place. And that starts with for me and for us, it starts with Indigenous peoples. And that's something we're born with. We're born with generations of knowledge of our land, our culture, and our identity. And yes, we have to fight to protect it. Yes, we have to show up in our voice even when it crackles and it's you're the only one in the room often. But I encourage each of us to make that space for Indigenous peoples and sometimes have that patience as we show up in the best way we know how. Because we also have ceremonies at home. There's public knowledge. There's also private knowledge. Understand some of that knowledge will never be shared with you. And that's okay, because spiritually, as we connect, I won't know everything about you. But when we come together in a spiritual light, and that's the way we work as Stomach people, as Stahobj people, we know that we connect spiritually. And it's things that you cannot see. It's just a knowing. So that's what we do. When we get up and we teach our kids to be ready for school, the first thing you do is you wash your face and you ask that you say the right words. You say the words that are meant to be said. And we ask that you hear the words, you put the water by your ears, that you hear the words that are meant for you. And we ask that you see the things, hear the things, and that you speak the words that are meant to be said. Because sometimes your mind might think that you have to say a few words, but your spirit might be saying, no, that doesn't feel right. So if we encourage our young people to speak from their heart, to speak from that spirit, which I never understood that until I went into ceremony in my older years, what our elders kept saying, to speak from your heart. It honestly felt a little soft to me, because I'm like, what does that mean? What is the heart? And they taught us, our education was to go in the mountains, to go in the woods, and sit with yourself until you know what that means. And so can you imagine if we all did that? Can you imagine if our children were just allowed to go outside and feel nature, to feel the world, to feel the rhythm of the earth, to put their feet. I used to tell teachers when they were really frustrated, I go, take your shoes off, go walk outside, feel the earth, and the earth will naturally balance you. There's a rhythm that will take care of the stress. And it was funny to watch, because I seen he was an old football player, one of our educators, and he was out there with his feet. I'm like, geez, your feet have not seen any light. It was bright white. And he laughed and he said, well, you said to go outside. I said, you're right, to go outside more often. So I really feel like our generations we're changing and we're growing. And sometimes when we do equity work, when we do work on Indigenous education, it feels, often it's felt over the years really heavy. But I can honestly say I see the sunlight. I see the sunlight when often all I could see was the sunset. And so this is exciting for me because I believe we have a new generation of little people coming out who will tell us what we need to know. And it is our role to really listen. And I love crazy kids. Like, I'm a welcome crazy kid. And I know for so much of the work that we do, it is important to listen. It's important to have a classroom or an environment that is perfect in our mind. But I really encourage us to break down some of those norms and to create that society, that community that we really wish to see. And these patterns, being I've been writing law and working as a policy analyst for many years, it's up to us to dream that, and we can change those things that we think are set in place. If we don't like it, let's change it. Let's change it. And so for us, the time is now. NABS, is, as I mentioned, we're working in Congress. We are so close to the finish line. I'm going to put it out in the atmosphere that let's pass our bill in November in the lame duck. That's what I'm saying. I think we can get there. And, we've been working the Hill, and with NEA's support, with your leadership, we can get there. And for this, what this bill will do is we want to conduct a full inquiry into the assimilative policies of U.S. Indian boarding schools, including identifying the locations of children burial sites, documenting ongoing impacts, and locating church and government records, in which they actually have millions of records, collect testimony from boarding school survivors, tribes, and subject matter experts, create a findings and recommendations report, identifying legislative and administrative actions to address the impacts of U.S. Indian boarding schools. And then also, this is important to note, is to investigate beyond the limited scope of the Department of Interior's Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative. And it's a special thanks to Secretary Holland. She has examined her own department's history in federal Indian boarding school, and it is not pretty at all. In fact, that's what we term genocide. So Secretary Holland is a special leader, and we are so grateful for her work and her commitment to uncover the truth of federal Indian boarding schools. But we also know that state, local, religious, and private institutions that operated boarding schools across the country have a responsibility as well. And so we want those records so we can find where our family members are. We want to know where our aunties, our uncles, our grandparents are buried. And so we know that much of that is in the records, and Native Americans across the country, families, tribal nations, are asking for all of us to work together to uncover this genocide. And so with your help and with your support, we can do this together. We can change the pathways, and we can uncover the harm that has happened to our communities, to our indigenous communities. And I think then, and really only then, will we heal this nation's past. And it is critically important to do so. So I urge you, I thank you, and I would like, if I could, close with a song. I love to sing because, as I mentioned earlier, it was prohibited. So I'm going to sing a song that would have been illegal for us to sing when I was a child. So if you'd like to stand, and we're going to, if you're able to, we're going to hold some space for the children who never made it home from the federal Indian boarding schools. we're going to hold some space and pray for the parents whose children were taken from them, and often where the villages were left in silence because there were no children there. We're going to pray for the descendants who have been trying to understand this this history, and we're going to ask for that light to shine on each and every one of us and our own families as we connect today with this special work. ACMT Gwitsi.
Oh, he loved. Ha, he, hey, he, hi, 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 hey, hi, hi. Oh, he loved. Ha, he, hey, he, hi, he, hey, hi, hi, hey. Oh, he loved. Ha, he, hey, he, hi, hi, hey, hi, Yo, he loved. Ha, hey, hi, 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 hey, hi, hi.
Listen.